everyone, welcome to Cardiovascular System Lab 2. So in today's lab what you will do, you will be dissecting sheep heart and you will also see the human heart anatomy from the model and API, which is very similar to the sheep heart. So what I want to do in this lab, I first want to go over the human heart anatomy via the model, and then we will be dissecting the sheep heart. Alright, so here is a model of human heart from your lab. This is the one big model we have, and there are several small models like this as well. Both are good, but this is, because it's big, sometimes it shows things a little bit better. So when we hold a heart, as you see, I'm not holding the heart this way, I'm holding the heart this way. So first thing we have to understand that heart from the anterior aspect, which is this aspect, anterior aspect or ventral surface, always tilted towards the left, because left side of the heart is more muscular than the right side of the heart. Now first thing to understand what makes us say that this is the anterior view of the heart, not the posterior view. So the anterior view of the heart or anterior surface of the heart, which we will see in real heart, such as in sheep heart, which is very similar to ours, is more rounded and has a prominent ridge on the anterior surface than the posterior or dorsal surface, which is more flat. The smaller model in the lab shows little bit better. So anterior aspect is little bit rounder and has a ridge, while posterior or dorsal aspect is more flat. Alright. So once we understand that, let's find the one inferior region of the heart and the superior region of the heart. So inferior region is more rounded, which we call apex. Superior is little bit broader, which we call base. And another way we say this is anterior view, we see these pipe-like structures, which are actually blood vessels coming directly from the base on the anterior aspect of the heart. And all these blood vessels that we are seeing, this one and this one, not this one and this one, these two are arteries. We will know what arteries are each of those, but those are coming from the most superior region of the heart onto the anterior aspect, and that superior region is the base of the heart. So sometimes that way also we understand that we are looking anterior or ventral surface of the heart. Okay, so after that we want to understand what are the four chambers of the heart. So all mammalian heart, our sheep's, has four chambers. Two chambers are upper chambers and two chambers are lower chambers. The upper chambers we call atrium, and atrium receives blood via vein. So always remember, two atrium, which are upper chamber of the heart, they receive blood via vein. Now right over here where I am showing this two atrium, I see a structure which looks like ear of a dog, and actually this structure is actually covering the chamber which are respective atrium. So if I ask you what structure it is, this will be right auricle, because you are looking from anterior surface. This side has to be right, this side has to be left, and this structure is left auricle, and the auricles actually covering each of the respective chambers. So right auricle is covering right atrium, and the left auricle is covering the left atrium. So those are two upper chambers receiving bloods. Now I see when I am looking at the right atrium, I am seeing the color of the right atrium has been made blue, and the color of left atrium looks more like light red. There is a reason for that. right side of our heart actually have all the deoxygenated blood. That means those are all carbon dioxide rich. And left side of the heart contains oxygenated blood, so they put those color as red. And because the right side of the heart carry deoxygenated blood, they put this color. Anywhere there is carbon dioxide rich blood, they put this color as the blue. So right atrium receives deoxygenated blood or carbon dioxide rich blood via this vein right here, which is actually made by the fusion of this vein. So this vein we call superior vena cava, and superior vena cava actually takes all the deoxygenated blood from our head, neck and the upper limb to the right atrium. Then if we look directly inferior region of the heart, there is another blue pipe-like structure, and this we call inferior vena cava, which is actually taking all the deoxygenated blood from the lower part of our body, that means lower limb, our trunk, and actually putting that also in right atrium. So right atrium receiving those deoxygenated blood. Now left atrium on other hand, which we will see in detail little bit later, will be receiving oxygenated blood, and those oxygenated blood will be received via pulmonary veins, which is on the left side as well as in right side. So we have 4 pulmonary veins, 2 on the left side and 2 on the right side, which actually will bring oxygenated blood from the lung into the left atrium. Okay, so these are our upper chambers. So underneath each chamber, upper chamber, we have lower chamber, and each of these lower chambers we call ventricle. So this is directly underneath the right atrium, this chamber. So we call it right ventricle. And if I open this chamber is directly under left atrium. So this chamber we call left ventricle. So we can understand if right atrium carries deoxygenated blood, right ventricle will be also carrying deoxygenated blood. If left atrium carries oxygenated blood, left ventricle will also carry the oxygenated blood. So what is actually going on? What is going on is that right atrium receiving deoxygenated blood from superior vena cava as well as from inferior vena cava into the right atrium. And once right atrium fills up, because it is directly above the ventricle, right ventricle, the blood just flows following the gravity into the right ventricle without any problem. So right ventricle starts to fill up. This phenomena, when ventricle is filling up, we call ventricular diastole. So to fill the ventricle up, there is a valve between right atrium and right ventricle that need to be opened up. And this valve we call tricuspid valve. Tricuspid means the valve has 3 flaps, leaflet-like structure. That's why we call it tricuspids, and we have 3 of those. So this is the valve which will be opening up between the right atrium and right ventricle, so that blood from right atrium can flows into the right ventricle when ventricle is relaxed. And this is called ventricular diastole. We also see this tricuspid valve is attached to the floor of the right ventricle via this bump-like muscle. This bump-like muscle we call papillary muscle. And papillary muscle actually holds the tricuspid valve via string-like structure which we call chordae tendon. This is chordae tendon which I am moving. String-like structure. So during ventricular diastole, ventricle is filling up with blood, and then once ventricle is completely filled up, ventricle starts to contract. So pressure in the ventricle rises. this ventricular contraction we call ventricular systole. And what happens is that as a result of that, tricuspid valve will be closed. And increased pressure will make tricuspid valve close between right atrium and right ventricle. And so that tricuspid valve is closed, the papillary muscle will actually pull on chordae tendineae to keep it closed. At the same time, this valve, which is you are seeing right over by this pipe-like structure, between this pipe-like structure and right ventricle, this valve, which has 3 cusps but half-moon shaped cusp, will be opening up. And we call this valve as pulmonary semilunar valve. And pulmonary semilunar valve opens up so that deoxygenated blood goes via pulmonary semilunar valve into this blood vessel. And this blood vessel, as we said in the beginning, is an artery. And this is the beginning of that artery, which we call pulmonary trunk. Pulmonary trunk ultimately will split into 2 parts: on left side, left pulmonary artery, and on right side, right pulmonary artery, to take the deoxygenated blood all the way to the lungs, where actually oxygenation of our blood will take place in a small blood vessel wall, which we call capillaries, and where inspired oxygen that we inspire actually will be diffused into our blood, and CO2 will be diffused out. Now make sure you remember, all artery in our body carries oxygenated blood except pulmonary trunk and pulmonary arteries, which are coming out of the trunk, and this is why they colored it in blue. Now on this small one, to make you understand that pulmonary trunk is different than any other artery, they actually colored it in purple, so that they try to say all artery carries oxygenated blood except the pulmonary trunk and the pulmonary arteries coming out of it. So remember, pulmonary trunk is the beginning of the pulmonary artery. Trunk actually will be splitting into 2 parts to give the pulmonary arteries, and because we have 2 lungs, we also need 2 pulmonary arteries. Okay, so once the oxygenation of the blood will take place, that oxygenated blood now will be coming to the left atrium via 4 pulmonary veins. Now all veins in our body carry deoxygenated blood except pulmonary veins. So this is why again you see pulmonary veins colored in light red, and in this ones also they are colored in red, for you to understand that. Okay. So 4 pulmonary veins which are bringing oxygenated blood actually will bring the oxygenated blood to the left atrium. And once the left atrium has the blood will be kind of follow the gravity and will come to the left ventricle from left atrium via open bicuspid valve. So this valve is about the same type as the tricuspid, but it has 2 flaps, and the valve is little bit thicker than the tricuspid because this left side is more muscular, so everything on the left side you will see is little bit more thicker than the right side. So bicuspid valve or mitral valve, which we also call, between left atrium and left ventricle will be opened up so that oxygenated blood from left atrium can go to the left ventricle to fill up the left ventricle. Again, this ventricular relaxation where the bicuspid valve is open, we call ventricular diastole. Once left ventricle fills up, then the pressure rises in ventricle and ventricle starts to contract. So that's again ventricular systole, and the oxygenated blood is ready to pass into an artery at this point of time. But the moment ventricular systole starts, bicuspid valve will be closed. And again we see the chordae tendineae, which is holding the bicuspid valve to papillary muscle. Papillary muscle will pull on the chordae tendineae to ensure that bicuspid valve stay closed, so that no blood from ventricle goes back to the atrium. At the same time, the valve, another valve which we call aortic semilunar valve, actually opens up, and so that oxygenated blood can go into this huge blood vessel which we call aorta from the left ventricle via aortic semilunar valve. So right here is the aortic semilunar valve, also half moon shaped and has 3 cusps. Now later in the semester, when we go into more into cardiovascular system, we will see aorta gives rise to all the systemic arteries of our body. That means from aorta, all the arteries which are distributing blood to all over our body will be arising. But aorta is starting right from the base of the heart. Okay, so the whole idea here is this: when tricuspid and bicuspid valves are open, that means during ventricular diastole, that means tricuspid valve, bicuspid valve are open during ventricular diastole, that means ventricles are relaxed, the semilunar valves will be closed. So this is pulmonary semilunar valve between right ventricle and pulmonary trunk, that is closed, and aortic semilunar valve between left ventricle and aorta, that will stay closed when ventricles are relaxed. That's called ventricular diastole. And these valves will be open, so that blood just coming from respective atria to fill up the respective ventricle. Once the contraction on each of these ventricles starts, that means blood has filled up each of the ventricle, and each of the ventricles starts contracting because of the high pressure, and the phenomena which we call ventricular systole, the semilunar valve will be open up. However, bicuspid and tricuspid valve will be closed. So usually when we hear our heart sound loved up, actually love is when our tricuspid and bicuspid valves are closing, and dub is when pulmonary semilunar valve and the aortic semilunar valve are closing. So pulmonary semilunar valve and aortic semilunar valve will close when you are filling up the ventricle. Okay, few small other thing. Now this particular model didn't show it very well, but so that we do not mix the right side of blood which has deoxygenated blood with the left side of the blood which has oxygenated blood, we have a muscular separation which we call interventricular septum. In this model it did not show you well. Real sheep heart, we will see that. Plus in this one they show the interventricular septum pretty well. Okay. Small other thing that we still need to know is this: when we are looking the anterior view of the heart, and which is also well seen from the smaller model, we see there is a groove that actually almost starts from the area where the left atrium is and ending anatomically right of the apex, if you are looking from anterior view of the heart, and this groove we call anterior interventricular sulcus, and that anterior interventricular sulcus is shown here better than in this model, because when you are seeing from anterior view, it should be actually ending anatomically right of the apex. If I am looking from the posterior view, we also have posterior interventricular sulcus, which we will also see from the sheep heart, and that actually will almost come close to the apex. So that will be ending close to the apex. And once we talk about that, few other things. We talked about pulmonary circulation, where right ventricle pumping blood to the two lungs for deoxygenated blood to get oxygenated and come back to the left atrium via pulmonary veins. We talked about systemic circulation, where left ventricle is pumping the oxygenated blood into the aorta, and aorta gives rise to systemic artery of our body, so that oxygenated blood diffused to all over of our body via different arteries branching from the aorta. However, heart muscle itself need to get oxygen, and heart muscle itself had to get rid of carbon dioxide. So that circulation we call coronary circulation. So we only need to know very little bit from there. What we need to see, right at the anterior interventricular sulcus, I see this artery. And this artery we call anterior interventricular artery because it is on anterior interventricular sulcus. We need to know this anterior interventricular artery is supplying oxygen to the heart muscle onto the anterior aspect. So heart muscle we call myocardium. So anterior interventricular artery on anterior interventricular sulcus is supplying oxygen to the anterior myocardium. Now, if I look between right atrium and right ventricle, there is a very deep groove, and there is an artery there which we call right coronary artery. It actually becomes posterior interventricular artery on the posterior aspect, and actually it goes right where the posterior interventricular sulcus is, and that posterior interventricular artery will supply the oxygen to the posterior myocardium. Just like that, and this groove between right atrium and right ventricle, where right coronary artery is starting to become posterior interventricular artery, that groove we call coronary sulcus. Now, those are two coronary arteries or three coronary arteries that you need to know supplying oxygen to the heart muscle. But coronary veins or cardiac veins could be many. But the only cardiac vein or big cardiac vein that you need to know is actually on the posterior aspect of the heart. Very close to the right atrium, you see this thick looking vein which we call coronary sinus, and this coronary sinus is made by the fusion of all the cardiac veins, great cardiac veins, small cardiac veins, all other middle cardiac veins. So together it makes coronary sinus, and coronary sinus actually will take all the carbon dioxide from the heart muscle or myocardium and actually will drain into the right atrium. So superior vena cava bringing the deoxygenated blood to right atrium, inferior vena cava bringing the deoxygenated blood to right atrium, and they are doing, superior vena cava is bringing from upper part of the body, inferior vena cava is bringing deoxygenated blood from lower part of the body, coronary sinus is bringing the carbon dioxide rich blood from the heart muscle, and all those carbon dioxide rich deoxygenated blood going into the right atrium. Always remember, vein brings blood to the heart and artery takes blood away from the heart. And all arteries carry oxygenated blood except pulmonary trunk and pulmonary arteries coming from the trunk. All veins carry deoxygenated blood except two pulmonary veins on the left side and two pulmonary veins on the right side. Alright. Lastly, what we want to do, which is the location of the heart. So this is also reviewed from our last semester. we know heart is located in thoracic cavity within its own cavity, which we call pericardial cavity. Always tilted to the left, since left side of the heart is more muscular than the right side. Now, one more thing you want to know, that heart is protected by double layer serous membrane. The outer layer, which we learned last semester, we call it parietal pericardium. And parietal pericardium's job is to hold the heart to thoracic cavity, hold it to diaphragm muscle directly underneath the heart so that heart doesn't overexpand. Visceral pericardium is just in connection with the heart muscle itself. So today when we will look at sheep heart in few minutes. What we will see, we will not be able to find parietal pericardium because heart already taken out of that parietal pericardium. But we will see the little bit of visceral pericardium, and if it is present, it will look like very a whitish looking thin membrane-like structure just on top of the heart muscle, which is heart muscle itself, or the myocardium made by cardiac muscle. Okay, so for the model, human heart model, this is as much as you need to know, and lab has both small and big model. It also has a model from the torso models such as this, so all are good thing to see. But using this, what we just talked about, we will also dissect our sheep heart. Sheep heart, everything will be similar, except maybe one thing will be seeing little bit different. Okay. Alright. So this is the sheep heart, and different sheep heart will be looking little bit different than one another, size wise as well as how much pressing has been done when they are preserving the sheep heart. So some of you will see looks little bit better, not too much pressed, and the one that I am looking is little bit pressed on this side. It's little bit bigger, maybe easier to follow. So first thing I want to understand is everything that we talked for the human heart. So very first thing I will do, remember, I have to understand where is the anterior aspect, or also called ventral aspect, and where is the posterior aspect, also called dorsal aspect. So little while ago we said anterior view is little bit rounder, has a ridge, and so this is my anterior view, and this is the posterior view, more flat. If you look at this one, same thing, this is the anterior and this is the posterior. Alright. So before we go further, one more thing, when you are seeing this heart, as we said, parietal pericardium has been taken out of the heart. So heart was taken out of the parietal pericardium. However, you see what I am pushing here, this is the visceral pericardium. So this whitish looking membranous structure that you see underneath is the real heart muscle, is actually visceral pericardium. So this is the visceral pericardium that you are seeing, and underlying that are you also see fat tissue. So, and this is the real heart muscle right here, myocardium, anterior myocardium, myocardium of anterior wall. Okay, so it's good to see, but we are not going to separate visceral pericardium or epicardium, but obviously it is good to notice that this particular white structure that you are seeing, this is a serous membrane, part of the serous membrane, and which we call the visceral pericardium or epicardium, and heart muscle is directly underneath that. Okay. Now our job is to find apex and base. So I'm looking from anterior view. Apex is right here, and superior broader region right here is the base. I know also this is base because I see something pipe-like coming out. Now understand that real heart is always a little bit difficult than the model. So, and sometimes you have to work with your hand to loosen the area so you see something which sometimes covered with the fat. Taking off fat takes long time, so you may have to use your hand to make sure that you see everything. So here is the apex, here is the base, and this is this anterior interventricular sulcus, which has anterior interventricular artery. None of the artery and vein that we talked about for coronary circulation we will look from the real sheep heart, but if you see an artery here, which is the on the right on the anterior interventricular sulcus, that will be anterior interventricular artery, which is part of the one coronary artery which supply oxygen to anterior heart muscle. Now all we need to know though from sheep heart, this groove which we call anterior interventricular sulcus. And anterior interventricular sulcus, as we said little while ago, it ends anatomically right of apex. So this is apex, this is anterior interventricular sulcus, and it's ending anatomically right at apex. That plus the base has this pipe-like structure which we already know are blood vessels, tell us that I'm looking the anterior or ventral surface. This heart may look a little bit better with that. So here is my anterior interventricular sulcus, apex, base, and base has those blood vessels coming out. Alright. I'm going to the posterior aspect. This is the posterior interventricular sulcus, which is actually going to end almost close to the apex. So in some of the heart it's a little bit better to see. This is posterior interventricular sulcus going almost to the apex. This is apex, and here same thing, posterior interventricular sulcus ending almost to the apex, but anterior interventricular sulcus is actually anatomically right of apex. Alright. Once we understand that, we need to see the chamber. Everything same, similar to the human. So first thing I understand, heart again tilted towards left from the anterior view because left side is more muscular. So I want to start looking from, you can do hold it towards you this way, or you can hold it towards this way. Either way, I want to talk about the right side first. So again I find this dog ear-like structure on the right side. The structure is right auricle. But if I ask you what chamber is it? It's the right atrium. Remember, right atrium doesn't have to do too much work, and most of the spaces of right atrium is actually given by right auricle. So right atrium is the chamber, just this tiny chamber. Then rest of it, this is the lower chamber, and this is underneath the right atrium and on the side of the anterior interventricular sulcus. So this has to be right ventricle. Over here on this side is the left atrium, is the chamber. If I ask you name the structure which is covering the chamber, that will be left auricle. You know it's auricle because it has dog ear-like structure, but the chamber we only call chamber as atrium or ventricle, and obviously this is the upper chamber, so this has to be atrium. It's on the left side, so left atrium. And then this huge chamber here, so all the way this is the ventricle, left ventricle. So it's a pretty big chamber for the left ventricle. Right? Okay, so left atrium, left ventricle, and that's the right atrium, right ventricle. Now let's go to the posterior view. Now when you are seeing posterior or dorsal view, remember your right side is same side of the heart side. So this has to be now your right hand here. So this is the right atrium, and so this will be right ventricle. This is my left atrium right here, and so this has to be the left ventricle. And again, this is the base, apex of the heart, and this is the posterior interventricular sulcus. Apex, posterior interventricular sulcus going almost to the apex, and right atrium, right ventricle, left atrium, left ventricle. Alright. Once I understand that, then I have to understand the blood vessels. And from anterior aspect, we only look for arteries to identify when we are looking at the sheep heart, and the posterior aspect we look for the veins on the sheep heart. So I want to go all the way right here to the base on the anterior view, and the most anterior artery I see is actually looks little bit purplish, a little bit light purplish. And what you can do, you see there is a hole. You can put your probe through the hole and see where the probe is going, which is going to this chamber. This tells you right away that this is the right ventricle it is going, so it has to be pulmonary trunk. But you can also put your finger through. If you use your finger, actually it's better, so accidentally you do not damage anything. So if I push it, and you can yourself feel it where each blood vessel is going. So in heart dissection, where each blood vessel is going is easy to understand, because you can follow those blood vessels through your finger or through the probe. So if I'm pushing through this blood vessel, it is actually going to this chamber, this whole chamber, and this has to be the right ventricle, this chamber. And so this blood vessel has to be pulmonary trunk, which we just talked about, gives two arteries, right and left pulmonary arteries, to take blood for oxygenation into the lungs. Now, you will not be able to see in most heart the pulmonary arteries which is coming out of the pulmonary trunk, because pulmonary trunk has been cut very short in most of the heart. So all you will be able to see is the pulmonary trunk. But remember, that's the only artery that's carrying the oxygenated blood from right ventricle via pulmonary semilunar valve into the lungs for oxygenation of the blood to take place. Okay, so once you see that, I want you to go directly behind pulmonary trunk, and you see this blood vessel with huge hole here, and on the other side there is a smaller hole. So smaller hole blood vessel actually came from this blood vessel with a bigger hole, which is directly posterior to the pulmonary trunk as you are looking from the anterior view. So I want to put my finger first through the bigger hole. So if I push my finger is going all the way here on this chamber, and you can see I can put through my probe too, is going all the way to this chamber, which you understand this is the left ventricle. So if the probe or finger going to this chamber, which is the left ventricle right here, this blood vessel has to be that artery which we call aorta, from which all systemic arteries starts. Yeah. Okay. So this is the aorta, but then right by the aorta you see this blood vessel with a smaller hole. This blood vessel actually came from aorta, which you do not need to know for practical, but after practical we will talk about it in detail. But this blood vessel we call brachiocephalic artery, and it gives blood, oxygenated blood, to the right side of our head, and a very important artery. However, for now all you need to know the aorta. However, most of your heart you may be able to see the brachiocephalic artery. Alright, so once you see pulmonary trunk and aorta, from the anterior view it's time to go to the posterior. And from posterior view we will look for veins. Remember, veins bring blood to the heart. And I want to start with the right side. So I know this is my posterior view, so this is right atrium. And we already know right atrium receives deoxygenated blood via two veins. One is superior vena cava, another is inferior vena cava. And so if there is superior inferior vena cava is present, it has to be very close to right atrium, and wherever the hole for superior and inferior vena cava is, if I push my finger or probe, actually that will be ending into the inside this chamber. So very close to the right atrium. Can I see any hole? Yes, I can see a hole. Yes. Now this hole, you will see the wall is much thinner than the hole that you just saw with pulmonary trunk and aorta. The pulmonary trunk and aorta, remember, they are arteries. Arteries wall are thicker. Vein walls are thinner. So I usually try not to put probe through the veins, because you may accidentally make a hole in the wall of the vein because they are so thin walled if you are not careful. So usually I use my little finger or index finger to go through the vein. So here is one hole by the right atrium, and I push my finger through it, and then I want to see where my finger is coming out. And if I go right, here is my finger coming out. So then once I find that, I can push a probe. And so this part is the superior vena cava. That means the top part of the hole, and the bottom part of the hole where probe is coming out, where my index finger right now is the inferior vena cava. So it's like a superior inferior vena cava looks like two holes at the end of a pipe, and the hole at the top of the pipe is the superior vena cava. Hole at the end of the pipe is the inferior vena cava. We just saw the human heart model, and there is a difference between this position of inferior vena cava in human heart. We are two-legged animal, so our inferior vena cava is attached to the inferior region of the heart, while sheep is a four-legged animal, so inferior vena cava has a posterior connection to the heart. Alright? Okay, so that's actually the main difference that you see between the human heart model and in this sheep heart. Okay, so this is superior, this is inferior. I want you to keep the probe, and always, if you have any confusion in the heart lab, always go to the chamber and see, is it really correct that that's superior and that's inferior? Has to be, because both of those are ending only in this chamber, and I know this chamber that I am pushing is the right atrium, covered by right auricle. Now I want to show you another superior inferior vena cava, which is pretty long, and so long that sometimes inferior vena cava is hard to see. So this is my posterior aspect of another heart, and this is close to this right atrium. I see there is a hole, very thin hole. So if I push so this has to be superior vena cava, and I can push my finger through it and see, is it really? Yes, it's going to the right atrium. But see how far the inferior vena cava would be. All the way here is the inferior vena cava, and part of it is actually covered with fat. So in those times, if your inferior vena cava is too long and it's covered with the fat, you want to cut tiny bit of fat so that inferior vena cava is exposed. Otherwise, hole will not be exposed, and our finger sometimes is not long enough to go through it. But you understand, this is the beginning of the this is the superior vena cava, because it's the beginning and going to the right atrium, and wherever it is coming out, that has to be, which is in this end, this has to be inferior vena cava, where it will be coming out. And sometimes it will come out not directly this way, but go little bit on this side. One more. As you will see, different types of superior inferior vena cava as well. This is pretty good, where superior vena cava here, inferior vena cava coming out, but inferior vena cava you cannot do too fast. Sometimes you try to. So this is the superior vena cava. If I push my finger through, then you see the inferior vena cava right here. So not this part. This has been torn in between. Sometimes that happens. But this is the superior. That's the inferior through which your finger comes. And you may have one more type where superior and inferior vena cava has been completely cut off. So this is posterior aspect, right atrium, but you see there's actually nothing much. So this part where superior vena cava has to be, and this is the area where inferior vena cava has to be, has been completely cut off. So those are the three types, three different types of heart that you can see. Alright. Lastly, I go to the left side. I'm still on posterior aspect, and left side I know this is the left atrium, and I remember which are the four veins which are bringing oxygenated blood to the left atrium, and those are four pulmonary veins. Now there has to be some hole, four holes nearby of left atrium. However, I just see one hole, which is actually going to the left atrium. So in this case, and most of all the ship heart that you will look, the pulmonary veins also are cut very short. So you only have one hole for the pulmonary veins. Some of you may see more than one hole, which were both of those going to be, or all the holes going to the left atrium, but most of you will be seeing just one hole going to the left atrium, and this hole is the pulmonary vein. This is cut very short, you cannot see four. Okay, so once you saw all this external anatomy, which is as important as internal, we are ready to cut the heart. And where we will be cutting the heart is actually, we will be coming back to posterior view or dorsal aspect. And we will not, at the very beginning, we will not just take a scalpel and cut the heart whichever way we want. We will cut the heart such a way that we open the right side of the heart first and see the tricuspid valve between right atrium and right ventricle, and then we cut the left side of the heart and see the bicuspid valve between left atrium and left ventricle. So to do so, and we are opening up the right side of the heart first, I come to posterior view. And right here was my superior vena cava. So my first cut will be from superior vena cava into the right atrium to the side of the heart all the way to the apex. And my second cut after the first will be from pulmonary vein, still on posterior aspect, through the left atrium into the side of the heart all the way to the apex, connecting with my first cut. That way actually we will be able to see the valve on the both sides pretty well. Okay, so if you did not have superior vena cava, inferior vena cava very well, that is almost already cut off, your cut should just start with the right atrium, through the right atrium on the side of the heart to the apex. For those of you who saw superior vena cava, what you will be doing, You already have superior vena cava here. Coming to the posterior aspect, and you start your first cut. Be careful, lot of fat there. There are chances if you are not careful you can have accident. And you can take this off. Just loosen this area a little bit one more time, and that's good enough. Okay, and I open the right side. The whole idea of doing this, I want to see how actually valves are located before I cut through the valve, because unless I cut through the valve, I will not be able to see how valves are located between the atria and ventricle. But this way it's showing me how the tricuspid valve is located. So first thing to understand, this is the right atrium and this is the right ventricle. How do I understand this is right atrium? Always the atrium on the surface will have this ridge, which comes from a muscle called pectinate muscle, which you are not responsible to know. At the same time, this ridge, if you remember, will make you understand that you are looking at an atrium. So you open the right side, remember. So this has to be right atrium, this is right ventricle, and this is the valve. Very delicate, and this is the way valve is actually in between right atrium and right ventricle. Chordae tendineae, you see a string commonly called heart string, and chordae tendineae is joining the joining the tricuspid valve. Valve is right here to the papillary muscle, which is this bump. Papillary muscle is on the floor of the ventricle. Okay, once I understand how they are attached, I can go tiny bit more just to see a little bit better. That will actually cut this part a little bit, but I can still see the valve a little bit more. So this is the way valves are located, tricuspid. So I will just cut here a little bit more. Or even from this side you can see. So once you see, that's also good enough. So here is one of the cusp, here is another cusp, and here will be another cusp. Chordae tendineae, papillary muscle. Wherever chordae tendineae is attaching, that's the papillary muscle, right atrium, right ventricle. If you cut through here, actually it will be showing you the valve not in actual position where they are located, how they are located, but it just will be by itself. So I cut it a little bit so you see, understand. So once you see that, it's okay to cut that. So this is the one of the cusp, another cusp, and the other cusp is over here, third cusp. Chordae tendineae, papillary muscle. Alright. Good. Also notice the very thin tricuspid valve is pretty thin, and when we go to the left side we will see the difference between tricuspid and bicuspid. Now we go back to the posterior surface again, and this time I am starting with the pulmonary vein and going through the left side and coming to the apex. You have to go through more than once. The left side is thicker than the right side. And a little bit more. Again, be careful that you do not cut your hand. Okay. Here is the left atrium, left ventricle, and the bicuspid valve. And here you see the valve. This is the chordae tendineae. Right here is the papillary muscle. Right here. So this is the way valve is attached between left atrium and left ventricle. So it's the valve, bicuspid valve, chordate tendon, and the bump where chordate tendon is attached is the papillary muscle. Like that little bit more to understand and see the little bit better. So left atrium, left ventricle, bicuspid valve, chordate tendon, papillary muscle. Now once you've done, then is the time to completely separate the heart. And this time you will use a scalpel. And what am I doing actually now? Cutting through the valve, cutting through the chordate tendon, which we did not want to do in the beginning because we wanted to see before cutting through them how they actually look, to appreciate the look. Okay, once you cut, first thing for us to understand is the muscular separation that's separating two sides. And so first thing we will be seeing this muscular separation, which we call interventricular septum. And once we understand that, we'll go to either side and we see which side on either side of the interventricular septum has thicker wall. So this side has thicker wall, and so this side I do know this chamber has to be left ventricle, because left ventricle works more by pumping the blood via aortic semilunar valve into the aorta to all over the body. So if you work out, you have more muscle. If I go to this side, there's very thin wall. So this has to be right ventricle. And why is it? Because right ventricle is only pumping the blood through pulmonary semilunar valve into pulmonary trunk into two lungs. Remember, lungs are in the same thoracic cavity as heart is. So right ventricle does not have to do too much work, so wall is thinner. So first thing when you see the internal anatomy, to find where is the interventricular septum, and then left ventricle, right ventricle. If you understand that, then this is my left atrium again, this is my right atrium. All this atrium has very little space. This is the tricuspid valve, again one more time. Tricuspid valve, this is the chordate tendon, this is papillary muscle, bicuspid valve, chordate tendon, papillary muscle. See how thick are all the valve, chordate tendon and papillary muscle on the left side, because you have to work more. Now one more thing you also have to understand, whenever you cut the heart, when I am looking only this side, this is internal anatomy, but if this is the left side, that means left ventricle, left atrium here, this is on my right side. So what view of internal anatomy I am looking at? Anterior view. When I am looking internal anatomy with posterior view, then right side on will be on my right side. So this is right ventricle, right atrium, left ventricle, left atrium, and the interventricular septum right here. Okay, so last thing I will do, I want to see the semilunar valve, and to do that it's easiest for me to keep the posterior view of internal anatomy towards me. So this is my left ventricle, so I know that there will be a valve between left ventricle and aorta, which we call aortic semilunar valve. So if I push a probe through the aorta into the left ventricle and cutting that entire area, following the probe, I actually will be able to see aortic semilunar valve better. Yeah? But actually aortic semilunar valve is little bit easier to see even without cutting. It's kind of Stay close by. Okay, so here is my semilunar, remember, is half moon shaped. So this is, they always have 3 cusps. So here is 1 cusp, and here is the 2nd cusp. 3rd cusp usually cut off when we are cutting. So at least you will be able to 1 and 3, 2 cusps. So this is the aortic semilunar valve. Now we want to do the pulmonary semilunar valve, and I'm still on posterior view. What am I doing? I am pushing my rope through pulmonary trunk all the way into the right ventricle. And this cut is tiny bit harder because it cut is little bit bigger cut, thicker cut. And so I'm just following the probe and just cutting from the right ventricle into the